Hi, hola, and welcome to Casa Árabe Online and to this webinar, Vaccine Diplomacy in the Mediterranean, an event we are co-organizing with the Regional Program for Political Dialogue in the Southern Mediterranean of the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation. Greetings from Madrid, where we are very much aware of the profound impact the global COVID-19 pandemic has left in countries of our region, of the Mediterranean region. The the various pandemic waves is something we share on both sides of our common basin. We are all somehow scarred, albeit our scars might look different. But if the past year, 2020, was a year of providing urgent medical assistance to prevent the spread of coronavirus, 2021 seems to be the year of vaccine competition. We have today gathered a panel of experts that will take us through the bumpy ride of COVID-19 to try and understand the keys of what lies ahead in the Middle East and North Africa. But first, let me give the floor to Thomas Volk, director of the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation's regional program for South Mediterranean political dialogue. He's in Tunis. Thomas, how are you?
Fine, thank you very much, Karim. And dear ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of the regional program Political Dialogue in the South Mediterranean of the Konrad-Adenauer Stiftung based in Tunis to this webinar jointly organized today with Casa Árabe, and we are very glad about this cooperation. This webinar, as you mentioned, Karim, couldn't be more timely as vaccination started in several countries of the South Mediterranean region, be it in Morocco or in Lebanon. However, the pace for vaccination should be increased in order to come out of this global pandemic as soon as possible. Whereas the COVAX initiative only starts to distribute vaccines worldwide, the Russian vaccine Sputnik V and the Chinese CoronaVac are already used in several South Med countries, be it in Algeria, Egypt, or in Turkey. In a representative survey we concluded between October and December last year in 6 countries in the region with more than 10,000 respondents, majorities in Algeria, there 67%, Morocco 61%, and Tunisia 59% said that they would have a positive view on China in the region as an actor in the region. Algerians have by far the most favorable view of Russia, with 66% holding positive views. Meanwhile, half have positive views of Russia in Morocco, 51%, and Tunisia, 50%. Hence, we saw high favorability towards China and rising favorability towards Russia in the MENA region before the vaccination process started. It would be very interesting, I think, to see if and how the favorability towards these countries changed after vaccine delivery started. COVID-19 will continue to place major stress on governments and citizens across the region. The pandemic has exacerbated many long-standing economic challenges facing MENA countries. Citizens take the health crisis seriously, but also worry about the effects on their basic livelihoods. Governments must work to effectively bring the pandemic back under control. Not only would this save lives, but governments that are seen as doing better on this front are also more widely trusted by their citizens, as our survey results show. And the whole KAS PolDiMed survey can, of course, be downloaded on our website. We also had a closer look in the previous month on the health sector resilience. We conducted a study on this together with Professor Rüm Ayadi, and we recently published a policy brief on the vaccine diplomacy in the Mediterranean. And Samer Al-Adrouj, who's also with us today, was the author of this paper. Though I'm very much looking forward now to this very timely discussion with distinguished experts to explore the current situation of vaccination programs in the region, as well as the geopolitical implications. Thank you, and I hand back to Karim.
Thank you, Thomas, for also that, let's say, thermometer of where are some of the perceptions of North Africans regarding China and Russia. We will definitely delve more into that. I mean, we have called this event the diplomacy of the vaccine diplomacy in the Mediterranean. We have two slight different versions in English and in Spanish, because of the word influence in Spanish translated as influencia might sound too much like influenza, and that might be slightly misleading. And also because we do think that it's a very geopolitical, a very geostrategic race. So in Spanish, we have called it a geostrategic race, this diplomacy for the Mediterranean, whereas in English it's the contest for influence. So it's clear that we need to draw lessons from this geopolitics of the pandemic. A very high level of interdependence and connectivity exists in today's world. We have now a shared feeling of vulnerability and also a need to coordinate our responses. However, we know also that the global mechanisms of governance have shown their cracks and their dysfunctionalities, with the World Health turned into a battlefield between powers, and with the United Nations Security Council unable to approve a declaration on the pandemic until last July, after months of deliberations and crossed vetoes, and when 10 million cases were already registered worldwide. The competition for increased influence in the Mediterranean, as Thomas was pointing out, is occurring mainly between China, Russia, the United States, and Europe. So these are, we know, the protagonists behind the vaccine race that will increase their soft power. Sinovac, Sputnik V, Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, AstraZeneca are the big contenders in the global market. The Chinese and the Russian vaccine variants were initially met with skepticism, but recent preliminary studies have shown that they may be just as effective as the vaccines produced by the US and by European companies. And with the added bonus of the facility in which China and Russia can supply large quantities, it seems clear that the geopolitical gains will be obtained in this conquest for new territories in the global vaccination programs. So many questions arise at this stage. Where will it be produced, and where will it be stored? How will it be distributed? What territories will be reached first, and which ones will be left behind? Can a country feel safe if its immediate neighbors are not? What new dependency relationships will be created, and on what basis? We will untangle some of these issues with our experts. Rym Ayadi, president of the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association, Samer Al-Atrouj, an independent journalist and author of the recent report published by the Konrad-Adenauer Stiftung, and Sami Nader, director of the Levant Institute for Strategic Affairs. Very briefly, Reem is an economist and international expert on inclusive and sustainable socioeconomic models. She's a senior advisor at the Center for European Policy Studies and the founder and president of the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association. Samuel Latrouche is an independent journalist whose articles have been published by Bloomberg and The Telegraph, as well as other media outlets. Sami Nader directs the Levant Institute for Strategic Affairs, which focuses on economics and public policy in the region. He's also a former advisor to the Lebanon Lebanon Minister of Labor, and he has also led international aid efforts in Iraq. So welcome to all of you. We will start we will have this discussion organized in, let's say, 3 segments. And we will be accepting questions during the debate. We will, though, present them to our speakers towards the end of our 3 segments. So let's start with an overview of the region. Reem, can I ask you to give us an overview of how the MENA countries have responded to the COVID-19 crisis and with this issue that we're tackling today, specifically with the vaccines?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Karim, for the introduction. I would like to thank also Thomas for inviting me to this very timely discussion on vaccine diplomacy. I have prepared a few slides just to give this overview. Also, this discussion to start based on certain data, at least the data that we could find publicly. First of all, I would like to spend a few moments on the global situation, whereby all the debate of vaccine, there has been some global coordination and also verification of the effectiveness of the vaccine. As you know very well, I mean, these vaccines have been quite quick to be made and to allow also to tackle and to mitigate the situation of COVID globally. So obviously there is an evaluation process for all the vaccines circulating. This is good news. Also the WHO is behind all of this. There is a strategic advisory group of experts who have provided recommendations about the populations that should be prioritized first, and this is pretty much used all over. And also the COVAX, everybody knows this already, and the ACT accelerator collaboration for global fair distribution has been there in the making. Now, also, I want to put a focus on the regional coordination and verification of vaccines again on the regional level. The EU, European Commission, through its institutions, have been also very active on this same aspect of distributing, verifying, first of all, and distributing the vaccine in the European Union, African Union as well. And this has been quite an important development, as again, not only on the global, but also on the regional levels. Now, let's look at the situation of the vaccines on the ground. So there has been all national bilateral contracts with the pharmaceutical industry, pharmaceutical companies. And then we can see here on the slide that is posted in front of you, that the share of population fully vaccinated against COVID-19, as per the data of our World in Data on the 2nd of March 2021, you can see that the leading country worldwide is Israel, followed by United Emirates Arab, and then comes the United States, and then at the 2% we can see Spain, since we are in Spain. And then we can go a bit lower. We can see Italy in green, 2.4%. After Italy, we can see Turkey. After Turkey, we can see United Kingdom, and then Brazil, and then you can have other countries in this graph. But then all you see in this graph, you see no countries from the MENA region, quite surprising. And this also shows that the distribution and the the prevalence of vaccination in the MENA region is rather abysmal. Now, the situation in the Mediterranean, if you move to the next slide, if you can, this is the second slide I want to show you, quite interesting as well. Some countries in the Mediterranean, North Med, France, Italy, and Spain, you can see that the total vaccinated doses administered, they're also quite low as compared to the total population in these countries. And you can see that the type of vaccines administered in these countries are, the majority of them, provided by pharma companies like Moderna, Oxford, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Biotech, and so on. Now, if we go to the Southeast Med, looking at, for example, Algeria, these are all the number you see on the right side of this slide of the graph. These are, from February 2021 to May, so it's not happening yet. So these are what we call, coming progressively. Algeria, it's Sputnik. This is Russia. Egypt, there are some from Beijing. Israel, okay, you have it there. Jordan, you can see that is a mix. Lebanon, also Pfizer, Biotech. Morocco, AstraZeneca, and also from China. And then other countries, it's not clear what the data is saying. So there is clearly, in my view, a lack of information that need to be fulfilled as soon as possible. So what I want to say is there are serious challenges for the region. Number one is say, for me, the first problem is the lack of transparency on not only the pharmaceutical trials, but also the effectiveness of vaccines and also the distribution of vaccines. I think this is very important to have further transparency on this, and also on the prices and contracts clauses with the nations and regional organizations to better understand what were the terms of the different contracts that have been signed with all the countries. This is number one. Number two is also the lack of capacity to manage and implement vaccines. I mean, even in Europe, there are problems in the infrastructure on how to administer those vaccines. Also, I think it's important to have some tools for recording, monitoring physical infrastructures, and also means to vaccinate people specifically in remote areas, rural areas and villages. Also, I see a serious delay in global effort for vaccine distribution coordination, and specifically in this bilateral, I would say, a spaghetti ball of bilateral contracts, which nobody knows what are the terms in there and what is it behind, and why some countries are having surpluses while other countries, they don't have at all any vaccines. Although for me, the right of vaccines and right of treatment must be just access, and also via equal distribution in all countries with no exception. Now, also, there is important to mention that there is different national strategies, and also it's not clear why there are those national strategies. What is the idea behind that? So what is needed, in fact, in my opinion, we need to have much more transparency and international monitoring over pharmaceutical industries, their contracts, and also increased coordination among states at a global level. Also, we have to prioritize global fair distribution among vulnerable populations, because those are the ones that are not accessing the vaccine, and especially effective vaccines. I think this is extremely important. And also, we need to always remember ourselves, or remind ourselves of the SDG goal, number 3, which is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all stages, which is the target SDG 3.8. And I remind you all, what is it? Achieve universal health coverage, including financial risk protection, access to quality essential healthcare services, access to safe, effective, quality, and affordable essential medicines, and vaccines for all. So my question to you, should the vaccines or treatment, because apparently there are also some treatments that have not been put in a transparent way for discussion, be used as a mean to gain political control via influence, diplomacy between nations? Is this in line with the SDG goal 5 or goal 3, sorry, and who is monitoring it? Thank you very much. This is my comments and we can discuss further later on.
Thank you, Reem, very much for this first overview that sets the ground for further discussion. I will go then to Samer Alatrouche. Let's tackle the subject matter that gives title to this session: vaccine diplomacy. You are the author of the recent report published by the Konrad-Adenauer Stiftung, in which you highlight the contest for influence. So can you please explain that map of vaccination in the region that Reem has offered us, but maybe in the key of diplomatic and soft power moves? Hold on, we cannot hear you. Have you silenced yourself?
I have silenced myself, I'm afraid. Yeah, thank you, Karim, and thank you, Reem. Yeah, I think what we're seeing in the region, it mirrors what we're seeing in Asia and in the Americas, particularly in Latin America. And you have a situation where I think there's some of the vaccines that were expected to be rolled out very quickly, what you might refer to as the Western vaccines, they haven't arrived as quickly as some people had hoped. And Russia and China have been able to provide quick and increasingly reliable alternatives in the case of Russia. So we've been seeing that as well in the region. We've seen it in Asia, I think, where now you have a lot of competition between not just some Western countries and China in the East, but also between India and China. So India is providing now, I think it's provided about 3 million free doses among its neighbors to counter the Chinese influence. And I think some Western countries are very concerned with that. In the Mediterranean, I think many of the countries have been placed in a position where they just wanted to get the vaccines as quickly as possible. The decision-making has not been transparent, however, so it's been quite hard to decide or to figure out, how these contracts are negotiated. And it's become a hodgepodge of where, for example, in a country like Egypt, who I think were very, very eager to get their hands on the share. They considered the pandemic, a major national security issue. You ended up with millions of doses from China, from Russia. There's also the COVAX initiative, which is providing them with doses. I think they might end up with a surplus at this point. And you have the same with Algeria as well. I mean, the Algerians started their vaccination. They rolled out the vaccination drive with Sputnik, but they're also foreseeing getting a very, very substantial supply from COVAX as well. So how that reflects on the, if we're going to call it a diplomatic contest, I think it's nothing new in the sense of these various countries, particularly China and Russia, and the US in particular, and also the UK, vying for soft power in the Middle East. Egypt is a great example of that. And what Russia and China have been able to do in the past in other issues, not when it comes to the vaccinations, but for example, when it comes to economic deals and military sales, is that they were able to provide an alternative to the traditional partners for a country like Egypt, which has been the United States. So if you recall, for instance, in 2013, when the United States decided to freeze arms shipments to Egypt because of the killings of protesters in Rabaa, the Egyptians simply turned to the Russians, they simply turned to China, they simply turned to France as well, which provided them with fighter planes. And I remember at the time, I was asking actually a senior official in Egypt. I said, look, you can't go to China for spare parts, Apache spare parts. And he responded saying, I could tell China to produce a facsimile of myself, and they will send me a general. He mentioned his name next week. So that perception of China and Russia, I think that plays again into how the China and Russia have come through again with this thing, with the vaccine. And with some other countries, they've been more traditionally, the relationship, for example, with Russia and Algeria has been more traditionally, I think, one, two-way, rather than as diversified as Egypt. But it has helped Russia, I think, and China give more diversified options even to countries that would have eschewed them in the past. So, Tunisia, which has yet to begin the vaccination drive, my understanding is that Russia had initially approached Tunisia with the Sputnik vaccine, and Tunisia was not interested. And then, when they figured out that the supply from their traditional partners, or what they were expecting to get, is going to come much slower, or there were holdups, they came back to the Russians, who I think now they've signed a deal for 1 million Sputnik vaccine doses. So it's it's part of a pattern that we've seen in the past relating to other things. The soft power, the contest has always been there, and we're seeing it playing out with the vaccine supplies. It's been a big win, I would say, for Russia, I think, because there was quite a bit of skepticism about the Russian vaccine initially. As just as early as a few weeks ago, I was reading one story. The headline was, Putin refuses to take the vaccine that he's encouraging others to take, clearly suggesting that there's something wrong with this vaccine. I think many people were very, very skeptical of the Russian vaccine, and it turned out, according to the Lancet, to be as effective as the other vaccines, and more effective than AstraZeneca. With the Chinese vaccine, there's a lack of transparency towards it. I think we might have to separate between perceptions, and this is obviously, I haven't done the survey, but we might have to separate between perceptions of a favorable view of China and Russia, which I think have always been quite strong in some countries in the Middle East, particularly over the past few years, where both countries are seen as less meddling, shall we say, than some Western countries, although Russia has had quite a few interventions in the Middle East. But we might have to separate between that and their view of the products themselves. So I'm not sure how people would view the efficacy of the Chinese vaccine, for example. There's been very little transparency on that. And what we've been looking at so far are just announcements from various countries. I saw a few days ago some Turkish scientists announced that the Sinovac vaccine was 83.5% effective. A few weeks before that, Brazilians said that it was 50% effective. We just don't know. That's one major problem there.
Thank you, Samer. In Tunis, and we're heading from Tunis to Beirut to now speak to Sami Nader. Sami, I wanted to hear from you on the geopolitical perspective of this rivalries. China, Russia, the US, and the EU. We are clearly in a multipolar world. As Samer was saying, we're also facing a lack of transparency in some of these countries, China and Russia being the case. But we also have actors such as the WHO, COVAX, and the Gavi Alliance. So how do all these actors interact, cooperate, or compete?
Thank you, Karim. Thank you, Konrad-Adenauer, for organizing this, and Casa Arabe, of course. I will have four sets of remarks. As Samer was saying, definitely, this vaccine diplomacy, if it's revealing something, it's revealing really that we're moving from toward a multipolar role, and there is a new dynamic worldwide, of course, but there is a new world regional dynamic, and we're witnessing a comeback of regional power. I mean, it's now it's not the Pax Americana that prevailed at least for 15 to 16 years is over by all means, and now we're seeing an emerging and increasing role of Russia, of course. I'll come back to that, and of China. Let me first start by China. For the last decade, China used to have in 2000 200 million in terms of trade. Now the amount has exponentially grew, and now it's one among the first business partners with the Arab world. And but this vaccine thing revealed a new China, not only as a business partner, but to China as a center of excellence, as a technological pole. And this is tremendous in my view, and it will have a tremendous, I mean, this is a trend. It's a mega trend that will shape the region. And it's true that China has started developing its Silk Road, passing through the Middle East, but it was stopped because of the Syria war in 2014, when it started in 2011, but China was focusing on Syria, on Beirut. Was the Chinese diplomats were paying regular visits to Damascus, to Beirut. They were looking to have a base in Tripoli, for instance, and Lebanon at the Mediterranean. Then they withdrew. And now with this vaccine diplomacy, we can safely talk about a new humanitarian Silk Road to be developed in two phases. First of all, they sent material like masks, like respirators, and now with the vaccine, they are first partner, as it was shown by Reem and Samer, in Egypt, in UAE, in Bahrain, in Turkey, and mind you, those used to be the traditional partners of Washington, and some of them are still. Some of them have a tense relationship with Washington, but definitely, I mean, there is a comeback. It's more than a comeback. I think that the penetration, Chinese penetration in the region, very deep and very strategic. Let me now talk about Russia. For Russia, the vaccine was a propeller at all levels. I mean, Russia has been in optimizing its resources. In 2015, it succeeded to turn a military victory into a diplomatic one. With few resources, they managed to save the Bashar Assad regime. But what was more important, because they had to face all the wrath and the fury of the Arab world that in a large proportion were backing the Syrian revolution, but the Russian could turn this military victory into diplomatic success. They ended up having a deal with America, with Turkey, with Israel, with the Sunni Arab states, and even with Egypt. And with this vaccine, I think this is a big image booster for Russia, that has been accused of supporting a dictator that has who has Arab blood in his hand. And there have been leakage in the press recently of Russia having achieving a deal with Israel and Syria, although it has been denied, but the fact that this has been leaked of an exchange of hostage by the Syrians and counterpart, Israel was able to finance a dose of vaccine inside Syria. So this is this vaccine diplomacy, let's put it this way, as an icebreaker in possible talks between Syria and Israel. My third point is related to another emerging pole, which is UAE and Israel. It's true that they are not this emerging axis in the Middle East, and this is a new trend in the Middle East that started like 1 year ago, has demonstrated an enormous capability in distributing the vaccine. And I think the chart that Reem showed is the pure evidence of how efficient and remarkable UAE and Israel were in distributing the vaccine. And this revealed a new axis in the region as a techno-military power in that sense. And this is legitimizing, in a way, at the level of perception, or it's helping to legitimize the peace accord signed by the two countries, and that was subject to criticism in the region. Definitely, their success worldwide claimed in distributing the vaccine were key, and we've said that China was the major provider of UAE in terms of vaccine, and not the American Moderna or Pfizer. Although Pfizer was present there as it was explained. My fourth point is concern Iran. And I will focus on one idea. I think it's very revealing, and it's something that is worthwhile monitoring for the days to come, whether Iran will have an IMF loan to help it support its program. As you know, it's a $5 billion deal with the IMF. Iran submitted its demand during Trump administration, and it was freezed. And one of the very few actions that was taken by the Biden administration, in my view, is to give a green light to IMF to start to process this loan, in line with other moves like facilitating the visa for the Iranian diplomat at the UN, or as well stopping the snapback mechanism in the deal. So this is to say that in summary, the vaccine diplomacy is revealing a trend in the region, a new dynamic that is seeing an increasing role of regional power and international power that were absent. On top of them is Russia and China, is legitimizing in emerging powers or axis of powers. I mentioned UAE and Israel, and it may reveal a breakthrough in the freezed negotiation or in the conflict opposing Iran and Washington, namely. And let me stop it at this level, and then we'll go to Q&A.
Thank you very much, Sami. It's clear that we were just seeing that first, as you mentioned, that first image that Reem gave us with the two main actors were Israel and the UAE as distributors of the vaccine. It is definitely, I mean, it's probably in the case of Israel, which has always been a giant of the pharmaceutical industry. It's not a surprise. It's I think rather a surprise in the case of the United Arab Emirates. I'm sure we'll have time to talk more about it. But let me start this second segment or round with probably more of case studies or delving more into specific cases. Although we have been illustrating all this vaccine diplomacy so far, but I was interested concretely in two what we call two giants. Egypt, due to its huge demographic importance to its population, and Algeria for its size. Both of them have also large amounts of reported cases. Of course, we may want to highlight other interesting cases. So, for Samer Al-Atrouche in Tunisia, let's concentrate on some of these two countries, and maybe you can highlight some of their specificities.
Yeah, so I mean, with Egypt, they've been hit hard by the pandemic, and I mean, just judging by, again, there's somewhat of a lack of transparency, and the deals are constantly being announced, but they at this point if you add together the statements that they put out, and you have almost as many vaccines as their population. So they announced, for instance, that they got 25 million doses from Sputnik doses, 40 million from COVAX, 40 million Chinese vaccine doses, and they've begun to roll it out. Again, they're trying to vaccinate. I mean, they started off with the frontline health workers, and they're working their way through vulnerable groups and the general population. Some people have expressed, like in other countries, hesitancy to take the vaccine, but they've been a case study, I think, in what you would consider a major regional power. It's one of Washington's primary allies in the Middle East, but at the same time making use of its relations with other countries to just get the vaccines that they want. And they did, initially announce that they would get Sputnik. It came quite quickly for them, and the Chinese vaccines as well. And they really diversified their supply. With Algeria, they started off quite quickly as well. I think they quicker than some other countries in the region, at least. And they started off with a large supply of Sputnik. They got the first drive started off with 500,000 doses of the Sputnik vaccine, and it's been proceeding since. And they've announced that they're going to be getting between 12 and 16 million doses from through the COVAX program. So that would be mostly Moderna or Pfizer, AstraZeneca. We don't know quite how many doses have arrived to this date today. There's more and more shipments that keep coming. So yeah, those are two, I think, the two largest countries in North Africa. Tunisia, again, it's faced a lot of hurdles. It's been interesting that they had initially rejected the Russian vaccine, if you were to believe a narrative, and then they had to come back for it again. And one other country, Libya, as well. They've ordered vaccines from several suppliers, but they haven't arrived yet. It seems like nothing's actually come to Libya so far.
It seems that these two countries, Egypt and Algeria, we know that they have very strong military sectors, and they also have good relations with both Moscow and Beijing. So I'm just wondering, Sami Nader, how is this compatible with the COVAX partnership led by the WHO and Gavi? I mean, is it okay now to have several bedfellows and just do whatever we want, or are there any red lines regarding the alliances one can have?
The fact is, as you were explaining at first, there were an immense lack of capabilities in dealing with this pandemic across the Arab world, which, I mean, was the exception of UAE and some GCC countries. This created a lot of frustration, actually, and to the point that any help would have been welcomed. In my view, China, of course, but even Russia is welcomed as a provider. And the WHO and other institutions, they were like, I think that they had a lot of delay in intervening. Though in some countries like Lebanon, the World Bank is doing a great job, actually. Why? Because he's dealing with a failed, he's replacing a failed state. In that sense, Lebanon has no capabilities. Plus, we didn't tackle the issue of financing the vaccine, and even post pre-vaccine, you had these countries dealing with the economic impact of the pandemic, and namely in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in the Levant. I mean, the pandemic, it came at really the very bad moment where these countries were suffering a deep economic and financial crisis. So anything that can alleviate their suffering is welcomed by the population. I mean, they are going through, a deep crisis, and this kind of consideration are off the table for now.
Rim Mayadi, it seems that Russia is freeing the patent for the production of the Sputnik V vaccine in both Algeria and Egypt. And outside of the region, of the MENA region, we know that India and South Africa are leading the pressure for local vaccine production. So the question is, can Middle Eastern and North African countries deliver when it comes to local vaccine production?
That's an interesting question. If we look at the preparedness index of the health sector prior to COVID-19, we can see that all the countries in the MENA region have not really been very much prepared to face such a global pandemic. And in any case, globally, the world was not very much prepared for it. So this is one observation which we can justify with data based on evidence. Now, the capacity of these countries to have their own vaccines, why not? It's possible if they try. I mean, every country is trying now. It's a kind of a competition for producing vaccines. The question is whether those vaccines are effective, and then if they are effective, it will take them time to develop them. So then, most probably, what is needed at this stage is to accelerate the vaccination. I would say the vaccination trend to ensure that the population is immune to COVID-19 and all its I would call adaptations and different strains of the virus, and this is what is the most, I would say, challenging in the whole process. That is why, in my early comment, I mentioned it's important to have a clear discussion about the effectiveness of the vaccines already in circulation. Now, having new vaccines by these countries, it all depends. It will take time. Doesn't mean that they will not manage to do it, but then most probably they can manage to do it, and it might be a bit late. And then it might also not respond to the specificities of that, the changing virus, which is pretty much changing very rapidly.
We have still some uncertain variables regarding local production. Let's move on to our last segment to talk about some of the successful, let's say, examples, but also of the real of the red zones of disaster. Samer has highlighted Tunisia maybe as a success story, which is a country that seems to have contained the pandemic last year. But on the other side, we have seen the opposite situation in countries ridden by conflicts such as Libya, Syria, the Palestine-occupied territories, which have not benefited from the Israeli distribution, but also, as Sami was saying, Lebanon, where the economic meltdown is as bad as a war in terms of lack of resources. So, if you could just highlight some of these red zones, Sami, that I know you have already done so, but if you could maybe stress some of them and tell us how bad is the situation.
Yeah, first of all, in Iraq, as you know, was the on one hand you have no growth, and then you had a big unemployment, spreading corruption, plus the decline in oil prices. Iraq was relying primarily on its oil revenue to face up or to cater for its basic needs. It has to suffer the decline, that sharp decline in oil prices due to the pandemic, and this is putting the country in a real distress. So this is when it comes to Iraq, plus all the consequences of the rising tension between America and Iran that is seen on the Iraqi scene. So this is putting or this is deepening the crisis, and namely the economic and financial crisis. So Iraq has no capability whatsoever in dealing with the pandemic, and the post-pandemic will be very, very tough for this country. Jordan was in a crisis, is an important public no growth, and but it managed to get a loan from the IMF. Here we had like two success stories when it comes to countries that acted swiftly and could manage to get IMF support, which are Jordan and Egypt. Egypt in less than 15 days managed to get two loans from the IMF, helping the country to face up to the pandemic challenges. Syria is in a catastrophe. You know, the Syrian pound yesterday hovered around $1 to 3,200 lira. It used to be before the crisis 50 lira the dollar. So here we're talking about a shortage of bread, a shortage of medicines, a real shortage. Plus, last year they had a very bad season for the agriculture. So Syria is facing hunger, and we don't have transparency on the COVID impact inside Syria, you know, and I imagine this is far bigger and far more serious than what is leaked by the press. And the problem in Syria, there is no light in the horizons. And the situation in Syria, it's practically the same in Lebanon. In that sense, these are the main regional actors that are present on both scenes. And we're seeing this between Iran and America on one hand, Iran and the Arab world having its big impact on these two scenes or three scenes of the Levant, but namely Lebanon, the crisis is bigger now. The Lebanese pound has lost 500% of its value. The minimum wage today, I was shocked to realize that the monthly minimum wage is less than $70. And this is a very quick indicator of what the situation is. And what is really dramatic, it's like there is no light in the horizon, as it is the case in Syria. And the country is totally blocked. It's in a deadlock. The political forces didn't manage to form a government for the 6 months. You know, for Lebanon, 2020 was a very bad year because you had like 3 consecutive crises. You had the economic and financial crisis, then you had the COVID pandemic, then you had the Beirut port blast. I mean, 3 consecutive crises in less than 1 year. And every crisis deepened the social and economic plunder that now this is why I think there is a diplomacy, an active diplomacy that is needed after this in this or along with this vaccine diplomacy or the post pandemic. And here it's we were talking about an increasing role of China and Russia, but in parallel, it's safe to say we are facing a declining role of countries and powers or regional powers that used to be very present. Like European powers. The event, for instance, was the backyard of, and for hundreds of years of Great Britain and France, and it's striking their absence or their declining role. They are trying to move things or to to take some initiatives, like France tried to take an initiatives after the Beirut port blast, but it led to nowhere. To the advantage to regional power like Turkey, more and more active in East Mediterranean and even in the Arab world, in Iraq, we have seen it lately, taking this or developing this operation. In Syria, definitely. I mean, this is one of the major stakeholder in Syria nowadays, and more present in East Mediterranean. So a declining role of Europe to the advantage of that of Turkey on one hand, Russia and on the other hand, and the Chinese megatrend, if I can use this term.
Well, yes, definitely a very worrying red spots in the region. We have not only, as you mentioned, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. We can hardly even mention Yemen because they are facing, even survival due to its hunger situation, a huge humanitarian crisis. And as I did mention, the occupied territories, and namely Gaza, is also under a very, very thin red line. But back to vaccine diplomacy and its ability to contain the spread of COVID-19 in the coming months. Can Rimayadi alliances such as the one led by the COVAX alliance bring about mechanisms of cooperation? Do you think there is room for everyone to engage in recovery, or are we going to see stronger rivalries and nationalisms?
I think, in my opinion, they have to enforce their coordinating action. I think the WHO, of course, I concur to the idea that they might have had a little bit of delay at the beginning, but their role has been important in the process. And as I mentioned previously, it's not only them, but also a collaborative approach between different countries where everybody is included. And then all the mechanisms of contracting the vaccines, the prices of the vaccines, and the distribution channels of the vaccines must be transparent and be seen by all the citizens. Why? Because we need, there should be accountability in that sense. This is a global pandemic, and this is the health of people worldwide. So in my view, and again, I made this comment at the beginning, I do not comprehend why countries, they have access of vaccines doses, and others, they don't even have access to procurement channels, fair procurement channels to have the vaccines. So this is why I would say organizations like COVAX or collaborative initiatives like COVAX must have the appropriate rules, and these appropriate rules have to be enforced, and not only enforced, but also they have to be accountable to the citizens, because after all these countries are getting indebted to buy those vaccines, and then the citizens will have to pay for it in the long run. So this is why it's important to enhance accountability.
Karim, I may add to this.
Please.
Yeah, just to build on what Reem was saying, and based on what we're going through in Lebanon. Some of the companies like Pfizer required to sign with the government prior to distributing vaccine, which is not the case of Sinovac and Sputnik V. So, and this was definitely, at least in the case I know, I mean, played to the advantage of the Russian and the Chinese vaccine. Because namely in countries, and even in developed countries, but namely in countries when you don't have enough state capabilities, you have to partner with the private sector. I mean, at least in distributing the vaccine and importing it, and not necessarily in financing it, but have to rely on some private institutions, NGOs, hospital, pharmacies, doctors, in order to speed up the implementation of the distribution plan. And the fact that in the case of Pfizer, and this has geopolitical implication, you know, because the more the country or the industry are opening up to the market, the better is to spread their vaccine and hence their influence. So.
Well, there is definitely questions to be asked on what is the logics behind how you know, private private pharmaceutical companies work alongside governments, and if their strategies match or not, and what are the mechanisms to make these strategies, if they are mismatched, how to readdress their courses. But I'll finish this last segment with Samer in Tunis, Samer Al-Atroush. We would have expected a closer cooperation between Damascus and Moscow. I mean, you have mentioned it, Sami has mentioned it. It comes as a surprise that we do not have a closer cooperation. Maybe there's something we are not aware of. And also, Sami did mention the importance of Turkey. Although it is a non-Arab country, it is still part of the neighborhood, and we should probably talk about it as you know, it has designed somehow its own response in terms of the vaccine strategy.
Yeah, well, with Syria and Russia, I think it's not as straightforward a relationship as maybe thought. I mean, clearly, you know, there's been an update since we published that report, which is that the Syrians have approved the patent. They approved the Sputnik vaccine for use in Syria. And Russia stated that now they're in talks with them to provide the vaccine. And they suggested that what had been holding it up was the lack of approval in the country. And clearly, there's more to that than meets the eye. I think if you scratch deeper, I mean, there's been tensions between Moscow and Assad that we've seen in the past. They don't always see eye to eye. There's frustrations, and in this case, it does look like Moscow does want someone to pay for these vaccines. So it's you know, I think with Turkey, again, there was no transparency. I mean, nobody came out. I think I haven't quite seen a very good explanation as to why they decided to go very, very big with the Chinese vaccines. I mean, I think it's 50 million doses, was it? And probably, you know, I mean, one thing you could say is that, well, they could get a lot of them very, very quickly. On the other hand, it is quite typical of the way Turkey, you know, proceeds. They diversify. They view themselves as their own regional power in their own right. They do domestic production when they can. You know, they are like Egypt and Algeria. They are, you know, they are in talks to produce a Sputnik vaccine domestically, but they also want to come up with their own vaccine. I'm not sure how that's coming along. If you know, so But back to Syria, I think, even maybe Sami might have more to add on that. I was curious to hear his views as well. It has been a very curious case. I mean, Syria is really hit hard by the pandemic. We don't know the extent. There isn't much transparency. It's a country at war. The government doesn't have entire control over the country. You have, a Turkish controlled region. You have an autonomous, in effect, an autonomous Kurdish region. So, the pandemic has just added to its woes. And as usual, there's quite a bit of cynical power plays as well. And when it comes to regional international politics, when it comes to Syria, it is a country under sanctions as well. But on the Russian response, it has been a bit curious.
Thank you very much. So we have 20 minutes for the Q&A, and maybe we can have a last comments from all of you. But we have a few questions already. The first one from Akram. Akram, he says, how do you evaluate the role played by the Southern European countries in assuring equal distribution of vaccines among Southern Mediterranean countries? So is the Southern European countries helping out the Southern Mediterranean countries? It's not directed at any of you, so whoever wants to step in.
I would maybe leave that to Thomas to tell. I haven't quite seen or felt the impact of Southern European countries in helping out here. It's
negligible.
Yeah.
Can I try to answer?
Yes.
I mean, if you look at the graph that I showed at the beginning, you can see that some of the countries in the Mediterranean, all of them have very low numbers of vaccinations. So they are trying to expedite the vaccination for themselves. I mean, you can see them all there. So of course, every country has to take its own responsibility and try to coordinate its own actions with I would say, the collaborative initiative that is called COVAX. But again, there should be, I think I see a serious problem of enforcement of all this process. And I can clearly say that we need more transparency for this.
So yes, there is not much more to add on that. Sorry, Akram. Riyad Ziri wants to ask Reem, is it possible to turn this political influence into an economic opportunity for all parties, that is donors and beneficiaries? Will a regional vaccination facility similar to COVAX be more efficient and just?
Very good question. I think I always believe there is always an opportunity from a difficult situation, and I believe that there should be a leadership within all this debate to have a clear, I would call it, regional action to move into certain principles that need to be fulfilled or respected. Particularly the universal access to healthcare, either treatment or vaccine, and then make all of this very clear and with the clear policies and actions. And I think the European Union could eventually take this role of leadership. They are doing it for the European Union.
I'm sorry, I'm getting details that we have technical issues with our interpreters, and I'm afraid that from now onwards, we will not be able to provide the Spanish interpretation due to some technical issues. So, disculpas por que estamos teniendo problemas técnicos para la interpretación del inglés al español. lo lamentamos en estos momentos, no podemos resolverlo. So back to another question. Malte Gasseling wants to know, Samer, whereas Russia and China offer their vaccines in exchange for money, COVAX offers them very low prices for the same vaccines. Do you think this is somehow understood or perceived by the ordinary citizen? And for Reem, another question: how would you say the countries could better coordinate between each other with regards to vaccination programs? So first, Samer.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's because I think again there's a lack of transparency. I mean, nobody's coming out and saying we're buying the Sputnik vaccine for this amount of money. That's not what reaches the public. And you know, on the other hand, both Russia and China have they've announced donations. I mean, China, I think, announced donating 300,000 doses to Egypt, which is, you know, a negligible figure, and it's the same that we see in Latin America, where China and Russia have both come in to save the day, as it were, in countries like Bolivia, which were unable, even, you know, they've been unable to get the vaccines from the States. I don't think that, you know, so what maybe the public sees more, in fact, is I haven't, again, this is just complete speculation, but if you want to look at what makes it in the news, I imagine an event like China sending a few 100,000 vaccines doses, which often comes with coverage of them being arriving to the country. I think in Bolivia, you have some senior officials who were there to greet it, and one of them pumped his fist in the air. I think the public might very well think that they're, getting them for free and for cheaper prices from China and Russia than they are from COVAX. I think that might be the perception. But again, this is it's speculation. But if you just look at the messaging and how successful I think both Russia and China have been in that messaging, where you can sell the vaccines, you can sell the doses, and on the other hand, you can provide, you can say quite negligible free shipments, but make an immense sort of song and dance about it when you do it. It might skew that perception, absolutely.
We have one last question that is slightly outside our region, but I think it's still interesting. It's a question to Sami. India and China have shifted the rivalries from military to political. India produces 60% of global vaccines. Is this trying to match China, to use it as a diplomatic tool to expand influence? And I would just add, might we see India sort of like becoming an actor in the MENA region?
Frankly speaking, given the advance of India, namely in the pharmaceutical industry, I was expecting India to have a leading role worldwide when it comes to producing and announcing, among the first to produce the vaccine. It was a bit late, I think, and India doesn't have up to now this this dynamic export as it is the case in China for many reasons. So mind you that before the pandemic, China was embarking on a very aggressive and ambitious Silk Road project. And it made huge quantum leaps in that sense, whether in Algeria, in East Africa, even in Lebanon and Syria, in the GCC countries. So commercially, China was having an advantage. And then today, I mean, China has the economic power, has the wealth that India does not have. So it have the capability to develop and use the vaccine as a diplomatic tool.
Mhm. Thank you. Well, thank you very much to our three speakers today. Thank you also to the audience and for your questions. I will hand back to Thomas Voll for any comments he might want to add.
Yeah, thank you very much, Karim, first of all, for this excellent moderation and for leading us through the discussion this evening. And I would, of course, also like to thank the translators for bringing all this into Spanish. And of course, want to emphasize one of the key, actually, topics or discussion streams that kept in my mind after this highly interesting discussion, and this is the lack of transparency. I think Professor Rimayadi set the stage already at the beginning when she was clarifying that there is a lack of transparency when it comes to the prices of the vaccines, the efficiency of the vaccines, but also the distribution. And indeed, I think that's the biggest point. So the lack of transparency is still one of the biggest, let's say, topics in the room to be discussed in the coming month, I think, in order to see what really the long-term impact on the region could be when it comes to vaccine diplomacy, even though Sameh Al-Atroush was mentioning in his paper already, and of course I recommend to read it if you did not do so yet, that most likely the impact of vaccine diplomacy will be overstated, and that the final consequences of this whole vaccine diplomacy, what some actors would even describe as a vaccine war, is at the end of the day maybe not as long lasting as some might think it would be. What is needed, I think, is, and all three speakers mentioned it, really the increased coordination at a global level of how the rollout of vaccines globally can be reached in the coming years. There are already first speculations that only by 2024 actually we will have a worldwide vaccination success. So this means, of course, that there is still a way to go. So once again, I would really like to thank all three speakers for their great contributions. It was very insightful and informative, I think. And we will certainly continue working on the topic of course, geopolitical questions and socioeconomic developments in the region, but also how COVID-19 will impact the region and where the region actually will be in let's say 5 years from now, after this decisive break, I think, of the global COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you very much. And with this, I give back the floor to Karim.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thomas. And I will just close with, again, thanking this great team of experts, Rimayadi from Barcelona, or based in Barcelona, Sami Nader in Beirut, Sameh Al-Atroush, and you, Thomas, in Tunis, and here in Madrid. I think it's one of the few marvels of these strange times is to be able to do these links and be able to share our knowledge and cooperation. I think it's clear that we are more and more interdependent. We need to really improve international mechanisms of cooperation, or regional, as one of our questions pointed out, to probably more of a regional answer to this. It's clear that some of the neighbors do share similar problems, and they share borders. So clearly the virus doesn't know anything about borders. And what we know is that there has been a regression in some of the gains we had against fighting against poverty, against hunger, against also gender inequality, that unfortunately with this turbulent times and restrictions, we are witnessing some steps back regarding this the sustainable development goals, and definitely the COVID-19 hasn't helped at all, and we're in here for the long haul. I'm afraid. So thank you again to all our three speakers, to the Konrad-Adenauer Stiftung, to our translators, interpreters. Sorry about the last technical problems we had. Eva Baena, Susana Pinazo, to Malte Gasseling from the Konrad-Adenauer Stiftung, Ruth Pimentel, my colleague here at Casa Árabe, our technicians, Gustavo Sierra, Manu Basayote, and this will be recorded and available on YouTube for you to watch again or forward. And the article by Samer is on the Konrad-Adenauer website, which is kas.de, and you can just find it there. And I think that's it from me. So farewell, goodbye, ma salama.